Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen.
And I'm Paul Carter.
And we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. All right, so are you ready to put on your detective hats today?
I think so.
Because we are diving deep into a real historical mystery.
Oh, I love a good mystery.
It is the relationship between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger.
Interesting.
You sent us a collection of sources, first-hand accounts, journal entries, even an obituary.
Wow, okay.
And they paint a complex picture
Sounds juicy.
of this really pivotal moment in early Mormon history.
Yeah, this is a big one for sure.
So to get to the bottom of this,
Okay.
I think first we need to understand who Fanny Alger was.
Yeah, who was she?
What do our sources tell us about her?
Well, what we know is that Fanny was a young woman,
Okay.
probably in her late teens,
Right?
who lived and worked in the Smith household in Kirtland, Ohio,
Okay.
from about 1833 to 1836.
So this places her right at the heart of the burgeoning Mormon movement,
Oh, absolutely.
in close proximity to its founder,
Very close.
living under the same roof as Joseph Smith. That definitely sets the stage for a complicated story,
It really does.
especially considering what we know about the later development of Mormon doctrine.
This is where things get tricky.
Okay.
The sources surrounding Fanny
Yeah.
and her relationship with Joseph
Uh-huh.
are limited and often contradictory.
Well, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was so long ago.
Exactly.
This was hundreds of years ago.
a long time ago.
What are we working with here?
Most accounts emerged decades after the events.
Oh, wow, really? Yes.
Decades. Decades later, colored by time, colored by memory, and perhaps even attempts to protect or vilify Joseph's reputation.
It makes you wonder, if there was nothing to hide, why were so many accounts recorded so long after the fact?
That's a great question.
What were people trying to achieve with these later narratives?
Right.
It definitely raises questions about their reliability.
It really does.
So that's something we'll need to keep in mind
Yeah.
as we examine these sources. Now, one surprising piece of the puzzle comes from Fanny's 1889 obituary.
Okay.
It describes her as a kind, generous woman,
That's nice.
loved by her community.
And for her.
She even joined the Universalist Church later in life.
Oh, interesting.
So that seems like she was trying to distance herself from Mormonism.
It's possible.
But what's so fascinating is that this obituary,
Yeah.
which is typically a source for biographical details,
Right.
becomes a crucial clue in unraveling this historical mystery.
Uh-huh.
It gives us a glimpse into Fanny's character in life beyond the controversy.
It does.
It reminds us that she was a real person,
Yeah.
not just a figure in a historical drama.
Right.
So let's get to the heart of this deep dive, the relationship itself.
Okay, let's do it.
What do the sources say about the nature of this relationship?
Well, there are accounts,
Okay.
like the one recorded by Mosiah Hancock,
Right.
that describe an alleged marriage ceremony
Oh, wow. A marriage ceremony.
between Joseph and Fanny.
But that doesn't fit with what we know about Mormon doctrine at the time.
Exactly.
That's a problem, right?
And that's why this account is so controversial.
Okay.
It was recorded 60 years after the alleged event.
60 years.
Yeah,
That's a long time
it really is.
to remember details like that.
It's raising questions about its accuracy
Okay.
and potential bias.
Of course. So what about marriage records?
Well, not to mention,
Yeah.
there are no official marriage records
Well, what?
for Joseph and Fanny,
That seems odd.
which is unusual for the time period.
You would think that if it was a legitimate marriage, there would be some official documentation,
Absolutely.
especially for a figure as prominent as Joseph Smith.
Right.
So this lack of documentation
Yeah.
is a major point of contention
Yes.
for those who believe the relationship was not a marriage.
Absolutely.
So if it wasn't a marriage, what was it?
Well,
Fair.
some sources certainly suggest that there are even hints of a possible pregnancy, although that's never been confirmed.
Wow, a pregnancy would certainly add fuel to the fire of controversy.
Yeah, it would.
So how did people react to this relationship at the time?
Well,
I imagine it must have caused quite a stir.
you're absolutely right.
I can only imagine.
And to really understand the gravity of the situation,
Okay.
we need to look at the reactions
Okay.
of two key figures.
Okay, give me the key figures.
Emma Smith and Oliver Cowdery.
Okay, let's start with Emma.
Sure.
She was Joseph's wife,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
So her perspective is crucial.
absolutely.
So what did she think?
Multiple sources describe Emma's reaction to the relationship as furious.
I bet.
And understandably so.
Of course.
I mean, imagine the betrayal she must have felt.
Yeah, that would be really hard.
There's even a vivid account from William McClellan,
Oh,
who claims to have heard it directly from Emma,
oh wow.
describing her catching Joseph and Fanny together in the barn.
Oh my gosh.
It's a powerful image.
I can only imagine the tension and the emotion in that moment.
Oh, it's an image that has stuck with historians.
I can see why.
And it really highlights the very real human drama at the heart of this historical event.
And it sounds like things escalated quickly after that, right?
They did after this incident.
Yeah.
Emma banished Fanny from the house,
Oh, wow.
sending her to live with Chauncey and Eliza Webb.
So it sounds like Emma drew a very clear line in the sand with that decision.
She did.
So then what about Oliver Cowdery?
And then there's Oliver Cowdery's reaction,
Okay.
which further complicates the narrative.
Okay, remind me,
Yeah.
who was Oliver Cowdery again?
Oliver Cowdery was one of the most prominent figures in the early church,
Okay.
second only to Joseph Smith himself.
Oh, wow.
He was Joseph's scribe for the Book of Mormon
Oh, okay.
and a close confidant.
So his opinion would have carried a lot of weight.
Absolutely.
So what did he think?
What's so striking
Yeah.
is that Oliver vehemently condemned the relationship.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He didn't like it? Calling it a dirty, nasty, filthy affair? Hold on. An affair?
Yeah.
If Joseph and Fanny were truly married, why would Oliver react so strongly?
That's a really good question.
Wouldn't he have supported the union?
You would think.
So, Oliver's condemnation directly contradicts the idea of this being an accepted marriage.
It does.
And it raises serious doubts about the claims made in those later accounts.
Look, it does.
It almost makes you wonder if those later accounts were trying to rewrite history,
Yeah, it's possible.
perhaps to align with the church's eventual acceptance of polygamy.
It's certainly a possibility.
So to explore that idea further,
Yeah,
we need to consider the church's doctrine on polygamy.
right.
At the time,
Huh?
in 1835, the Doctrine and Covenants,
Yeah.
which is a key text for Mormons,
Right.
explicitly denounced polygamy.
It did.
So, if Joseph was already practicing polygamy, why would he have included a denouncement of it in the Doctrine and Covenants?
Yeah, that's a really big question.
It seems like a blatant contradiction.
It does, doesn't it?
It really does.
And that's why this entire situation is so fascinating and so complex.
Yeah.
There are so many layers to unravel.
It's like we're trying to solve a historical puzzle with missing pieces and conflicting clues,
It really is.
but I'm ready to dive deeper. We left off talking about how the Doctrine and Covenants, published in 1835, explicitly denounced polygamy,
Right.
which seems at odds with this alleged marriage to Fanny Alger.
It's a glaring contradiction.
It is.
And it raises a lot of questions about the timeline of events
Yeah.
and how the doctrine of plural marriage evolved within Mormonism.
Okay, so let's dig into that timeline.
Right.
What else can we piece together?
Well, another crucial piece of information relates to the priesthood keys.
Okay.
Joseph Smith didn't claim to receive the sealing keys,
Uh-huh.
which were later interpreted as necessary for eternal marriage until 1836.
So if those keys weren't in place yet,
Right.
how could any alleged marriage to Fanny
Right.
prior to 1836 be considered valid
Yeah.
within the context of Mormon doctrine?
Exactly. It's one of the many inconsistencies that critics of the marriage narrative point to.
So we have a lack of official records,
Yeah.
conflicting accounts,
Right.
and a doctrinal timeline that doesn't quite add up.
It sure doesn't.
It's no wonder this is such a debated topic.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm curious, what evidence do those who support the marriage narrative present? I
Well,
must have some basis for their claims.
they do.
What is it?
Their arguments primarily hinge on later accounts,
Okay.
particularly those from Fanny Alger's family.
Okay.
Her brother Lorenzo, for example, maintained that Fanny considered herself married to Joseph
Okay.
and believed the union to be legitimate and sacred.
I can see how those accounts would be compelling for those who want to believe that Joseph was a prophet and that everything he did was part of God's plan.
Right. And it's important to acknowledge that those accounts come from individuals
Okay.
who later embraced and practiced polygamy within the Mormon faith.
So their perspectives could be influenced by their desire to reconcile their belief in Joseph's prophetic authority with this early and controversial relationship.
That's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I can see that.
It makes you wonder if they were looking back and reinterpreting the past through the lens of their later beliefs and experiences.
It's like they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
They have these later beliefs about plural marriage and Joseph's prophetic role,
Right.
and they're trying to make the historical facts align with those beliefs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to examine these accounts critically,
Okay.
taking into consideration the context in which they were produced.
Okay, so we have these later accounts from Fanny's family, but what about evidence from the time period in question?
Right.
Are there any other sources that shed light on the relationship?
There are a few, but they also present challenges in terms of interpretation.
Okay.
One individual who claimed to have witnessed the relationship was Chauncey Webb, the man Fanny lived with after being banished from the Smith home.
Yes.
Chauncey Webb.
He's a close associate of Joseph Smith, right?
He was.
Okay.
And his accounts are interesting because they provide some of the most detailed descriptions of the relationship's aftermath.
Interesting.
He claimed that Emma was furious,
Okay, so we already know that.
which we've already established,
Right.
and that Fanny was unable to conceal the consequences
What does that mean?
of her relationship with Joseph,
Okay.
possibly hinting at a pregnancy.
Wow. That's a significant detail.
It is.
If Fanny was pregnant,
Yeah.
it would certainly add another layer of complexity to the story.
Right.
But again, we're dealing with accounts that were recorded long after the events took place.
Right.
We just talked about that.
And we have to consider Webb's potential motivations.
Okay.
He, too, later became a prominent figure in the church
Okay.
and may have had a vested interest in portraying the relationship as a marriage,
I see.
especially as polygamy became more widely accepted.
It all comes back to context and perspective.
Absolutely.
It's like everyone is looking at the same set of events through different lenses.
Right.
And those lenses are shaped by their own experiences, beliefs, and even their desire to protect or condemn Joseph Smith.
Exactly.
Yeah, so how do we know it's true?
It's a tangled web of interpretations,
It is.
and it makes it difficult to discern what truly happened from what people wanted to believe had happened.
That's like we just keep hitting this wall of ambiguity.
Right.
Are there any sources that offer a more definitive perspective?
Unfortunately, not really.
Oh, come on.
But one aspect of this story that I find particularly compelling is the reaction of Oliver Cowdery.
Okay.
We talked about how he condemned the relationship as an affair,
Right.
but it's important to remember that he was excommunicated
Yeah.
for his outspoken criticism of Joseph Smith.
So not only did he disagree with Joseph's actions,
Right.
he was also punished for speaking out against them.
Exactly.
Wow, that's intense.
And his story highlights the risks associated with challenging the authority of a revered leader,
Yeah.
especially within a tight-knit religious community.
It's a stark reminder that dissenting voices were often silenced,
They were.
creating an environment where it might have been difficult for people to freely express their doubts or concerns.
Precisely.
So the power dynamics within the early Mormon movement played a significant role in shaping how events unfolded
Yeah.
and how information was disseminated.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how many other voices were silenced or went unheard.
That's a question that historians continue to grapple with.
It really does.
And it's important to acknowledge that those power dynamics were at play,
Yeah.
not only within the broader community, but also within the Smith family itself.
You're talking about Emma Smith.
Right.
She must have been in an incredibly difficult position.
Absolutely.
Oh, I can only imagine.
She was Joseph's wife, the
Yeah.
first lady of the movement,
Right.
but she was also deeply hurt and betrayed by his actions.
Right.
Some accounts describe her struggling to come to terms with the idea of plural marriage, while others suggest she was vehemently opposed to it from the very beginning.
Wow.
It must have been an incredibly difficult and painful experience for her,
I can't even imagine.
torn between her love for Joseph and her own convictions.
It's a heartbreaking situation.
It is.
And it makes you wonder about the toll this whole ordeal took on her emotionally and spiritually.
Absolutely.
But this wasn't just a personal drama.
Yeah.
This was happening against the backdrop of a religious movement,
Yeah.
facing increasing scrutiny and persecution.
Exactly.
So that context is crucial
Yeah.
to understanding why the secrecies surrounding Joseph's relationship with Fanny
Right.
would have been so important to him.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was consolidating his power,
Yeah.
establishing new doctrines, and navigating the challenges of leading a community under constant pressure.
It was a pressure cooker situation.
He was.
And the Fanny Alger situation exposed the existing fault lines within the movement and within Joseph Smith's leadership.
It's like this one event cracked open a Pandora's box of questions and controversies that would continue to shape Mormonism for years to come.
And that's why it's so important to understand this event in its full complexity.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's not just a historical curiosity. It's a pivotal moment that had ripple effects throughout the church's history. It forced people to choose sides, grapple with their beliefs, and confront the evolving nature of their faith.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
We still have much to unpack. So we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive really digging into the Fanny Alger controversy. And I have to say, it's more complex than I ever imagined.
It's a story that challenges our assumptions.
It does.
And forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. About power, secrecy, and the evolution of religious beliefs.
Exactly. So after examining all these sources and perspectives, I think it's time we try to answer the central question.
Okay, what's that?
Was Fanny Alger a wife or a mistress?
It's the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right.
We've uncovered a lot of evidence, but it's often contradictory or open to interpretation.
So let's lay out the arguments for each side.
Okay.
What evidence supports the claim that Fanny was Joseph Smith's wife?
Well, proponents of the marriage narrative often point to those later accounts from Fanny's family, particularly her brother, Lorenzo. They emphasize that Fanny considered herself married to Joseph and believed the union to be sacred and legitimate.
But we've also discussed how those accounts emerged decades later.
We did.
In a very different context. And could be influenced by the family's later acceptance of polygamy.
Right. And critics of the marriage narrative highlight those very inconsistencies. They argue that the lack of any contemporaneous evidence, such as marriage records or journal entries from the time period, casts serious doubt on the legitimacy of the alleged union.
It's strange, isn't it?
Oh.
If it was a legitimate marriage,
Yeah.
especially for someone as prominent as Joseph Smith,
Right.
you'd think there would be some kind of official documentation.
You would.
And that absence is a major sticking point for those who believe the relationship was something other than a marriage.
Right.
Okay, so what about the evidence supporting the idea that it was an affair?
Okay.
What do those arguments look like?
Well, critics often emphasize the secrecy surrounding the relationship. The fact that it was condemned by those closest to Joseph, like Oliver Cowdery, and the fact that it ultimately led to Fanny being banished from the Smith home.
Yeah, and let's not forget the significant power imbalance between Joseph, a charismatic religious leader, and Fanny, a young woman under his authority. That raises serious concerns about consent and agency.
It does.
Making the idea of a legitimate marriage even more questionable.
It's a crucial point. It's hard to imagine a truly consensual and equitable relationship, given the dynamics at play.
And the fact that Joseph and his followers, including Fanny's family, consistently denied the practice of polygamy during this time period just adds another layer of complexity.
Right.
If this was a divinely sanctioned marriage, why all the secrecy and denials?
Right. And the timeline of the sealing keys, which Joseph didn't claim to receive until 1836, further complicates things.
Right.
If he hadn't received the necessary authority to perform eternal marriages, what kind of marriage could this have been?
So we're left with more questions than answers.
We are.
It seems like there's evidence to support both sides, making it nearly impossible to reach a definitive conclusion.
That's the nature of historical mysteries. We can examine the evidence, weigh the arguments, but ultimately we're left to draw our own conclusions based on the information available.
It's frustrating, but also fascinating. I feel like we've gone down this rabbit hole, uncovered all these intriguing details.
We have.
But we're still left with that lingering question. What really happened between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger?
Perhaps that's the enduring power of Fanny Alger's story.
I think so.
It challenges us to think critically about the past, to acknowledge the complexities and ambiguities, and to resist the urge for easy answers.
It's a reminder that history is not always neat and tidy.
It's not.
It's messy, it's complicated.
It is.
And it's often filled with more questions than answers.
And in this case, it's a story that had a profound impact on the lives of those involved and on the trajectory of the Mormon movement itself.
Okay, let's talk about that impact we've discussed, the immediate fallout,
Yes.
Emma's anger, Oliver Cowdery's excommunication.
Yeah.
Fanny's banishment.
Uh-huh.
But what about the long-term consequences?
Well, on a personal level, it's clear that the relationship had a lasting impact on those involved.
Right.
Emma Smith, for example,
Yeah.
is often portrayed as a tragic figure torn between her love for Joseph and her struggles to accept the doctrine of plural marriage.
It's hard not to feel empathy for her.
It is.
She was put in an impossible situation.
Absolutely. And Oliver Cowdery's story highlights the dangers of dissent within a tightly controlled religious movement.
Yeah.
His excommunication serves as a reminder that challenging authority, even when based on moral convictions, can come at a steep price.
And what about Fanny? What happened to her after she left the Smith household?
She went on to live a relatively quiet life,
Okay.
eventually marrying and raising a family.
Good for her.
But it's impossible to know the full extent of the emotional and psychological impact this experience had on her.
It's a reminder that behind these historical events are real people.
Yes.
With real lives, hopes, and dreams.
And those lives are often profoundly shaped by forces beyond their control.
So on a personal level, the Fanny Alger controversy had a devastating impact.
It did.
But what about its impact on the broader Mormon movement?
That's where things get really interesting. This event, regardless of how you interpret it,
Yeah.
is often seen as a turning point in the development of the doctrine of plural marriage within Mormonism.
I see.
It exposed existing tensions, sparked dissent,
Right.
and ultimately forced Joseph Smith to confront the issue more directly.
It's like this one event cracked open a Pandora's box of questions and controversies that would continue to plague the church for years to come.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that all of this was happening during a time of immense growth and change for the Mormon movement.
Right.
They were facing persecution, navigating doctrinal shifts, and trying to establish themselves as a legitimate religious community.
So the Fanny Alger controversy becomes even more significant when you consider the broader historical context.
Yes.
It wasn't just an isolated event.
Right.
It was a catalyst that shaped the future of the church.
And it's a story that continues to resonate today.
It does.
Prompting us to examine the relationship between faith, power, and individual agency.
It challenges us to think critically about how we interpret the past.
It does.
And to acknowledge the complexities of religious history.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Fanny Alger's story is a powerful reminder that even in the realm of faith and religious belief, things are rarely black and white.
I agree.
There are gray areas, there are contradictions,
Right.
and there are always more questions to ask.
And those questions are worth asking because by delving into these complex and often uncomfortable aspects of history, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our beliefs, and the forces that have shaped the world we live in.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I'm left with a sense of awe at the complexity of history.
Me too.
And the power of individual stories to illuminate broader truths.
And I hope you, our listener, walk away with a renewed curiosity for the past and a willingness to embrace the messy, ambiguous nature of historical inquiry.
Because sometimes the most valuable insights come from those unanswered questions, from the spaces where history refuses to give us easy answers.
And on that note, we'll bid farewell, deep divers.
Until our next descent into the depths of history, keep those minds curious, those questions flowing. And remember, the past is never truly past. Its echoes reverberate in the present, shaping who we are and how we understand the world around us.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.